I'm Dr. Jamshed Dalal from Kokilaben Hospital in Mumbai. Today I'm going to give a very brief outline of the ESC 2021, the presentations made on second day. I've taken a few slides from various subjects which I thought were important. One was NOACs in patients with atrial fibrillation. We all know that NOACs have now become the standard therapy for atrial fibrillation, but this is the present recommendation that guidelines recommend the use of NOACs over vitamin K antagonist, only contraindications being mechanical prosthetic valves, moderate to severe mitral stenosis, and severe kidney dysfunction. Here also we know that there are trials going on for the use of NOACs in kidney disease and hemodialysis, but at present this is where it stands. And we need to look at NOAC plasma levels in certain cases. We need to look at drug-drug interactions and the risk of bleeding. And of course, look at the anti-cancer and anti-epileptic drugs. Also, don't forget people who are taking herbal medicines or the involvement of NOACs and COVID-19, which is a topic by itself. Now, we often discuss about using the rational dose of NOACs because in India, there's a tendency to use low-dose NOACs. So this is a chart to help us how to decide what to do. So need to assess the patient for NOAC-specific reduction. So if he qualifies for that, then of course use a reduced dose. If he doesn't qualify for that, then you look at the bleeding risk and any drug-drug interactions that you may have. If there's none or maximum, then again you look at the concern about disproportionate and non-modifiable bleeding risk. If that is there, then of course you use drugs like dabigatran 110 milligrams twice a day. If there's no concern about disproportionate bleeding, again, use a standard dose of NOACs. Again, if you look at suitable NOACs with less interactions, alternative for interactions, and again, you look for concern about disproportionate bleeding risk, then you need to assess again. We can do plasma levels, though of course this is difficult. But clearly the important point to make is that do not use a reduced dose of NOAC unless there's a very specific criteria that happens for that particular patient. So correct dose of NOAC use is very important. There's another important question about the diastolic blood pressure and how should we consider its importance. Now we know in the past diastolic blood pressure has been predominantly ignored, but now let us look at this very interesting data out here. This data shows that if you have a diastolic blood pressure, this is data related to diastolic blood pressure. So let's take diastolic blood pressure in the common normal range of 70 to 90. You can see there's a slight increased myocardial infarction and there is increased stroke. Now, if the diastolic blood pressure increases from 90 to 100, 110, 120, of course, there is an increase in myocardial infarction and a significant increase in stroke as well. That's expected with the rise of pressure. But let's go to the other direction. If the blood pressure diastolic falls to 60 to 70 and then further to below 60, there is a significant difference between the stroke and myocardial infarction. You can see that the stroke more or less remains the same with falling diastolic blood pressure, but look at the increase in myocardial infarction. So at blood pressure below 60, you can see that the chances of stroke as high as somebody with a diastolic blood pressure of 120. So the preponderance of myocardial infarction over strokes at low blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, suggests that excessive diastolic hypotension associated with antihypertensive risk therapy increases risk. So I think this is an important contribution to our thinking of diastolic blood pressure. We all know about the J-shaped curve and the fact that the falling diastolic blood pressure is harmful. We knew that for a long time. And here's a nice interesting data on whether the patient is revascularized or not. So if you see the red line, these are patients with revascularization. And the purple ones are the ones who are not revascularized. As you can see, the J curve is much worse. So therefore, if you have coronary artery disease and your diastolic blood pressure falls below 60, the chances of getting myocardial infarction are much higher if you're not revascularized as compared to revascularized. That makes common sense. So the results from the Ephesus trial indicated that myocardial reperfusion reverses the J-shaped curve in association with CV risk and diastolic blood pressure in patients with left ventricular dysfunction and heart failure. This, of course, was the Ephesus was the heart failure study, but clearly the importance of very low diastolic blood pressure in the presence of uncorrected coronary artery disease is something to keep in mind. Here's another look at chronic coronary syndromes. We know that in 2013, they changed from stable coronary artery disease to management of chronic coronary. So stable coronary artery disease became chronic coronary syndromes. We know that. And they looked at the goals of the management, either prevention of myocardial infarction and death or relief of angina and reduction of ischemia. In prevention of myocardial infarction and death, you clearly need to recognize and treat unstable symptoms or ACS early. That's most important. Assess the immediate risk of MACE, myocardial infarction and death. These patients, of course, require immediate angiography and intervention. Then, of course, you can use functional and imaging diagnostic tests to identify these patients with high risk. They need very aggressive therapy and followed by revascularization of their ACS. So the therapy is directed towards preventing death as the highest priority. On the other hand, for stable patients, the chronic coronary syndromes, reducing angina and reducing ischemia is what we are looking for. So therefore, you look at the lifetime risks, and then depending on the lifetime risks, you change the lifestyle. Reduction of LDL, most important. Reduction of BP, very important. Reduction of diabetes, again important. And stopping slowly, and stopping smoking. So here there's an individualization of therapy depending on the risk factors. So here there's an acute emergency with the need to prevent death, and here there's more like long-term benefits in terms of reducing angina and ischemia. Now, when we talk of optimal medical therapy, and there's a lot of work now being said about optimal medical therapy for patients with chronic coronary syndromes. Now, we know about all the drugs that have been used, but I think today most of the guidelines are talking about personalizing, individualizing therapy. So in patients who have chronic therapy, we need to consider also the use of non-hemodynamic agents, metabolic agents like trimetazidine, and again to try and achieve more complete elevation of myocardial ischemia and angina. So partial relief of angina is associated with more cardiovascular events. So you need to try and alleviate all the ischemia, and you can use both hemodynamic and non-hemodynamic drugs. So second-line drugs like long-acting nitrates, trimetazidine, ivabradine, all these should be combined with beta blockers. So you get a hemodynamic and a non-hemodynamic drug to achieve more complete alleviation of the myocardial ischemia. So we are talking of personalized and individualized therapy using early add-on combination of anti-anginal drugs, trimetazidine or ranolazine, that are proven to reduce angina frequency and decrease the use of nitrates and improve the quality of life. So clearly there's been a change into a combination of therapy for these agents. Again, looking at some of the recent data on NOACs and atrial fibrillation, this is the patient group, which is the elderly group. Now we know that even in elderly group, we can use NOACs, and in fact, they're indicated, but we must use caution when you're taking these drugs. And you should look at the patient's frailty. For example, patients are frail. You need to look at their body weight, their renal function, their compliance for taking the drugs. And patients with severe frailty, or if life expectancy is very limited, then be very careful about the use of NOACs in this particular group of drugs. However, elderly patients do fall, and that might sometimes lead to increased bleeding and injury. And therefore, people have suggested that may not be a good idea to use NOACs, but again, you can use with care. And what ESC suggests is that falling is not a contraindication. Of course, you need to look at all their aspects and why they fall, etc. So again, assessment of their cognition and adaptive behavioral symptoms are important to make decision of these patients who are very elderly and frail. So if you look at the use of NOACs in patients, very fit, well managed, clearly they are in green zone, and therefore you need to use NOACs definitely without any hesitation in the correct dosages. In patients who are vulnerable, mildly fail, moderately fail, you have to look at individualized therapy, maybe lesser dose if they fall into that category. Also look at what type of work they do in terms of whether it's a heavy work or finance or whatever. What are the chances of them getting injury? So these are the things you look at. And then, of course, the red list is where you have to be very careful and watch them, this very severely frail people. And you have to understand what is your goal. Is there any significant, sufficient evidence for use in very elderly patients? And you really need to discuss with the patient and the family the advantages and disadvantages of using NOACs. So friends, I've taken you through a very brief aspect of some of the presentations made in the ESC 2021 on the second day. Thank you very much indeed.